During World War II, all Americans of Japanese descent living on the West Coast were removed from their homes and put into prison camps. Executive Order number 9066 deprived us of our rights, although we never had been accused of any crime. 120,000 Japanese Americans.
The first immigrants from Asia arrived over 100 years ago.
In the early days of the West, the Chinese were imported to take over the jobs white men shunned. As soon as the work was finished, the Chinese, who had done the hardest and dirtiest work of building the West, were driven out. In 1882, the United States barred further Chinese from entering the United States. The Chinese Exclusion Act.
The removal of Chinese from America created a labor shortage. Japanese immigration was encouraged. Scores of young men boarded ships like the America Maru, headed for adventure and fortune.
The first generation of Japanese living in America is called
Issei.
We left Japan seeking adventure.
And fortune.
We headed for America.
In America, dollars grow on trees. You just have to reach up and grab it.
In America, the talk is all of gold, the gold rush, and gold mountain, and golden fields of grain.
days of spacious dreams. I sailed for America, overblown with hope, overblown with
Hope!
For the Issei, the trip from Japan to America was a 2-week boat trip. But first, there were physical exams at Yokohama and Kobe. Sometimes boarding house owners would bribe the doctor so we would be detained for days, sometimes even months. While we waited, we paid unreasonable prices for bad food and terrible lodgings.
When we finally succeeded in passing the medical exams, we set sail for America. But then there were more tests for trachoma, hookworm, and syphilis.
We third-class passengers lined up in front of an inspector. The conditions on board ship was terrible. Hidokata.
First-class passengers don't have to be inspected at all.
Smell bad, don't come too close.
I was indignant at being treated like a dirty animal.
We are ordered on the deck, and inspector feels joints at elbows, around neck, and both sides of my groin. I felt humiliated and furious.
Angel Island, San Francisco Bay.
When the young lady comes from Europe, the first thing she sees is the Statue of Liberty. But I am from Hiroshima. When I crossed the big Pacific Ocean, I saw an island named Angel.
Angel Island, beautiful name, but I see no angels here.
Only nameless, numbered immigrants.
Waiting and hoping, my arrival on Angel Island brings no greetings to my ears.
Only wet and shivering women.
Waiting and hoping.
I wait here on Angel Island dreaming of a brand new life. Soon I will be 21.
No one can stop the sun.
Oh, say, can you see?
My father arrived in San Francisco in 1906, in the early part of April. Soon after landing, he was caught up in the San Francisco earthquake. But when my father saw the American flag, he fell in love so much. The American flag was so beautiful. All through his life, he couldn't wait for a national holiday to come so he could put up the American flag. To this very day, every time I go to the cemetery on special occasions, I take him the American flag. You know, he wanted to be a citizen, but had to wait 50 years. He arrived in 1906, and they wouldn't let him be a citizen until 1956. Charlie Matsubara, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
When we Japanese first arrived in America, we were bachelor communities, moving from place to place, season to season, following the trail of jobs.
Fishing,
Farming,
Mining,
cutting lumber,
picking crops.
building the railroad. I'm a railroad worker. I'm great. All the others complained, it's too hot, it's too cold. My shoes are all wet. Oh, it's so scary. They all ran off. I alone remained. I built the tracks America built on, a railroad worker. Me.
But by 1908, the presence of Japanese was causing concerns in some quarters. Japan agreed to stop the flow of laborers coming to America, And in return, America permitted the men who were already here to send for their wives.
Or get wives.
Arranged proxy marriages.
I rented a suit and had my picture taken.
I sent my photo home.
He had his picture taken with his hat on. When he took it off, he was tall.
Mine didn't have a decent suit to his name. The one in the photograph was rented.
The photograph showed him standing in front of a big building with stone lions. Afterwards, I learned it was Chicago Public Library.
I thought my husband owned a factory, but he was the janitor.
My bride liked me.
That was Picture Bride system. My family arranged a match with a young man who was working in America. He and I exchanged photographs. Then we married.
Two sisters born in Albuquerque, Mary Matsubara and Evelyn Togami. Can you tell us how your father and mother met?
While our father was working in America, his family in Japan thought he should be married.
So they picked out Mother from a family they knew in Japan.
When her ship landed, a bunch of picture brides were standing at the deck.
They were all lined up along the rail, looking down at all these men, waiting below.
I think that one is mine. Oh, but oh no, he's too ugly.
But Mom was lucky.
And so we were lucky too.
Our dad was good looking.
Yes.
So the itinerant lives of these immigrant laborers were transformed into the stable lives of family men. Side by side, Issei men and women worked to build new lives in America.
But since the early days of our arrival, certain pressure groups tried to remove Japanese from the United States.
As early as 1905, the San Francisco Chronicle carried inflammatory headlines.
Japanese, a menace to American women.
Brown men and evil in public schools.
Brown artisans steal the brains of whites.
Crime and poverty go hand in hand with Asiatic labor.
Hidoi Shimbun, Seattle PI, a rag. Just to sell itself, it blows the news into flames. Not once more will I read it.
By 1924, anti-Japanese sentiment culminated in the passage of laws that prevented us from owning land or becoming American citizens.
Jap, get away.
Japs
must go.
A
Jap's a Jap. Fire the Jap. Lousy Jap. Dirty Jap. Sneaky Jap. Yellow Jap. Go home, Jap! I swore it would not devour me.
I swore it would not humble me.
I swore it would not break me.
One day, on our way home from bathing in sulfur pools, my husband, a man of few words, told me he was called
Yellowface.
For a while, encountering a person who was anti-Japanese, I rubbed against a spirit out of harmony with mine.
In my strong belief, I lived as in a tower and weathered abuse.
The birth of offspring to immigrant families marked a new era in the history of Japanese Americans. The second generation of Japanese living in America is called
Nisei.
I was a creature of two worlds, approaching manhood with an American heart and mind and a Japanese face. I was steeped in American culture, but aware of an alien heritage, living in a society not quite ready for me. At times, I ask myself, what am I? Where am I going?
We were Americans by birth, education, outlook, and inclination. Still, there was no denying our Japanese features, our cultures, and our communities.
My life was an odd mixture of the Occident and the Orient. I sat down to American breakfasts and Japanese lunches. My palate had a fondness for corned beef and cabbage, and rice. I was comfortable with a knife and fork, and with chopsticks. At Christmas time, I hung my stocking over the fireplace, and I ate rice cakes and long noodles Japanese style at New Year's. I said my grace at mealtimes and my prayers at bedtime.
Now I
lay
me
me
down to sleep.
My parents spoke to me in both English and Japanese, and I answered in whatever was convenient, or a mixture of both.
We worked at our family-run businesses after school, but still played kick the can and baseball. We still listen to Jack Benny and the Lone Ranger.
Hi-yo, Silver!
And we sang along with the top 10 on Hit Parade.
I was a creature of two worlds, approaching manhood with American heart and mind and a Japanese face.
To the flag.
I was steeped in American culture, but aware of an alien heritage, living in a society not quite ready for me.
Of the United States of America.
At times, I asked myself, what am I? Where am I going?
The Japanese have just bombed Pearl Harbor.
What is Pearl Harbor?
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Japan?
You say Japan?
Seattle, Washington, December 7th, 1941. Today is my 4th birthday, and there are giants in our house. The tall man is wearing a brown hat. The young one has hair the color of carrots. Cute baby, he tells Mama. I'm 4, I say. Then Mr. Brown Hat puts some bracelets around Daddy's hands and they take him away. Daddy, Daddy, where are you going? Shirley Nojima, Seattle, Washington.
When I went to grade school on December 8th, one of the teachers told me, you people bombed Pearl Harbor. Aki Kurosu, Seattle, Washington.
On December 8th, the financial resources of the East Bay community were frozen, and the FBI seized community leaders, Buddhist priests, Christian ministers, language teachers, owners of commercial fishing boats, all those who were thought to be a security risk.
On the night Papa heard about Pearl Harbor, he burned the Japanese flag he had brought with him from Hiroshima 35 years earlier. It was such a beautiful piece of material. I couldn't believe he was doing it. He burned papers too and documents, anything that might connect him to Japan. But those precautions didn't do him any good. He was not only an alien, because after 35 years, he was still not allowed to become an American citizen, but he held a commercial fishing license. The FBI were picking up such men for fear they were making contact with enemy ships off the California coast. They took Papa to Fort Lincoln, an alien internment camp in Bismarck, North Dakota, where he was interrogated.
Okay, what's your name?
Wakasuki Ko,
And your place of birth?
Kake, a small town in Hiroshima on the island of Honshu.
And what school did you attend?
4 years at Chuokaku, a school for military training.
Why did you leave?
The marching, I just got tired of the marching. It's not what I wanted to do.
Have you any relatives serving in the Japanese military now or in the past?
My uncle was a general, a rather famous general. He led the regiment that defeated the Russians in 1903.
Well, have you ever been in contact with him since coming to the United States?
No, I have contacted no one in Japan.
Why not?
I am what you call a black sheep of the family.
So you have never returned to your homeland?
No.
Because you are the black sheep.
It's because I have 10 children and just couldn't be able to afford to go there.
Okay. What are their names?
How can I remember that many names?
Why don't you try?
William is the oldest, then Eleanor, Woodrow, Francis, Lillian, Reijiro, Martha, Keo, let's see, and Miss Mary.
That's 9.
9?
That's only 9. You said there were 10.
I told you there are too many to remember.
All right, well, it says right here that you are charged with delivering oil to Japanese submarines off the coast of California.
That is not true.
Several submarines have been sighted there.
If I would have seen them, I would have laughed.
Why?
Only a foolish commander would bring his vessel that close to the shore.
Well, what do you think of the attack on Pearl Harbor?
I am sad for both countries. It's the kind of thing that happens when military men are in charge.
Well, what do you think of the American military? Would you object to your son serving?
Yes, I would protest it. The American military are just like the Japanese.
What do you mean?
They also make war when it's not necessary. As long as military men are in control of the country, you'll always have war.
And who do you think will win this one?
America, of course. It's richer, has more resources, more weapons, more people. Japanese are courageous fighters, and they'll fight well, but their leaders are stupid, and every night I weep for my country.
Ah, you say Japan is still your country.
I was born there. I have relatives living there. In many ways, Japan is still my country.
So do you feel any loyalty to Japan or its emperor? I said, do you feel any loyalty to Japan or its emperor?
How old are you?
29?
When were you born?
Hey, I'm the interrogator here, Mr. Wazuki, not you.
I'm just interested to know when you were born.
All right, 1913.
I have been living in this country 9 years longer than you have. Do you realize that? And yet, I am prevented by law from becoming a citizen. I am prevented by law from owning land. I am now separated from my family without cause.
Those matters are out of my hands, Mr. Wazuki.
Whose hands are they in?
Look, I do not like North Dakota any more than you do. The sooner we finish these questions, the sooner we'll both be out of here.
And where will you go when you leave?
Who do you want to win this war?
I'm interested in knowing where you will go when you leave.
Mr. Wazuki, if I have to repeat each one of these questions, we will be here forever. Who do you want to win this war?
When your mother and father are having an argument, do you want them to kill each other? Or do you want them just to stop fighting?
On February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the incarceration of 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, a majority of them American citizens.
Most of the East Side men taken by the FBI were interrogated at Army forts in Missoula, Montana, or Lincoln, Nebraska, then sent to Santa Fe and Lordsburg prison camps in New Mexico. They were declared enemy aliens.
Most of these men had lived in the United States for years and had been denied American citizenship because of Asian exclusion laws and were fathers of American-born children. Their average age was 55.
Military zones were created along the West Coast. Japanese living in the western halves of California, Washington, and Oregon would be removed from their homes.
When the war broke out, I was a 20-year-old trucker working for my father, an East Bay potato farmer. I knew I couldn't continue trucking during the war and asked my father what to do. Without batting an eye, he said,
Ben, enlist in the Army. America is your country.
So, my brother Fred and I got in a car and drove 150 miles to the nearest recruiting station to volunteer. When we got there, the recruiter said, "We don't want Japs."
One sign on a drugstore that was forced to close read,
Many thanks for your patronage. Hope to serve you in near future. God be with you till we meet again. Mr. and Mrs. K. Iseri.
After Pearl Harbor, there were curfews and unannounced searches at all hours for contraband weapons, radios, and cameras. Many people destroyed whatever identified them with Japan, including photographs, books, and treasured heirlooms.
My father went into his bedroom dresser where he had kept 2 samurai swords. They were family treasures which had been handed down to him. Our ancestors had been samurai warriors, and I had looked forward to owning those swords someday. As a boy, I had secretly taken them out of many times to admire. My father slowly removed the swords from their inlaid cases and took them into the backyard where he dug a large hole. So he has the swords. He thrust both of those swords into the ground, and then we buried them.
We were given 48 hours to move out. We had left most of our possessions behind, but Mama had brought along her pottery, her tea sets, lacquer tables, a few heirlooms like Granny's kimonos from Japan, and one fine old set of china, blue and white porcelain, almost translucent. On the day we were leaving, our car was so crammed with so much. We had luggage and boxes and kids. We had no more room. Mama had to sell her china. Second-hand dealers had been prowling the neighborhood.
"Hey, I'll give you $15 for that china."
But its full setting of 12 was at least 200.
Hey, 15's my top price.
Mama started to quiver. She didn't say another word. She just glared at that man.
All right, well, I can't give you more than $17.50 for that china.
Mama walked over to the red velvet case and took out a dinner plate. She smashed it on the floor in front of the man's feet.
Hey, those are valuable dishes.
Then she took out another dinner plate and hurled it at the floor. Then another and another. Never moving, never opening her mouth, just glaring at the man as he retreated out the door. When he was gone, she just stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, smashing cups and bowls and platters until the whole set lay scattered across the floor in blue and white fragments.
When we left, we swept our homes and left them clean. That is how Japanese like to leave a place.
It can't be
Shigatagana. We must endure.
By November 1942, the move to 10 permanent camps was complete.
Manzanar, California.
Tule Lake, California.
Grenada, Colorado.
Boston, Arizona.
Gila River, Arizona.
Heart Mountain, Wyoming.
Topaz, Utah.
Gore, Arkansas.
Jerome, Arkansas.
Minidoka, Idaho.
Jerome and Aurora were in the swampy lowlands of Arkansas. The other camps were in desert or semi-desert areas subject to dust storms and extreme temperatures.
We called Poston Camp in Arizona
Roasting.
Toasted.
Dustin.
After our first day at camp, my little Gore told me, "I don't like Japan, Mommy. I want to go back to America."
The life here cannot be imagined. Sometimes I'm resigned to it, but whenever I see the Century Tower with floodlights, it gives me a feeling of being a prisoner in a concentration camp. I try to be happy, and yet a gloominess creeps in.
In 1943, Ansel Adams photographed Manzanar Camp in the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Adams' photographs were published in a book to much controversy because of the sympathy for the inmates. The title, Born Free and Equal, the story of loyal Japanese Americans.
Standard housing, nothing but a long, empty barracks, 20 by 100 feet.
1 cot, 1 mattress, and 2 blankets per person. 1 light bulb and 1 coal-burning stove.
Partitions don't even reach the ceiling. There's no privacy.
I didn't sleep a wink at all. My baby cried all night.
We know. We're cooped up in this 20 by 20 foot room, sleeping, dressing, ironing, hanging up clothes, all in this one tiny room.
Always standing in line.
Standing in line for supplies.
Standing in line to take a shower.
Standing in line to eat in the mess hall.
Standing in line in front of the latrines.
Just 1 open room with 12 toilet bowls arranged back to back. No partitions, no privacy.
My mother was so modest. It was agony for her, sitting down like that in front of other people.
But we set about creating a life for ourselves in these dismal surroundings. We partitioned our barracks into tiny rooms with blankets. We made benches, tables, and shelves with scrap lumber.
We converted the barracks and mess halls into classrooms. The assignment one Caucasian teacher gave us was, "Write why you are proud to be an American."
Many of us joined the military straight out of the camps, where our parents, wives, and children were imprisoned. Some of our dads were in all-male Department of Justice camps, like Lordsburg and Santa Fe in New Mexico.
Military sons visiting their fathers in Department of Justice camps had to make their way west from basic training at Camp Shelby in Mississippi or from Fort Snelling in Minnesota, where they trained for the Military Intelligence Service. In many cases, there were 2 sons. In a few cases, 3 or 4 sons serving in the United States military while their fathers were incarcerated.
These young men, some 18 or 19 years old, would arrive in uniform at the enemy alien camp where their fathers were incarcerated. Often this was just before these boys were shipped out to the front. And you know, a lot of them didn't come back.
The 442nd Regimental Combat Team and the 100th Battalion became the most highly decorated units in U.S. military history, with one of the highest casualty rates of the war.
Over 30,000 Nisei boys served in all Japanese units of the U.S. military.
We felt we had to prove our loyalty, and we did it in blood.
In 1952, the United States government finally gave my grandmother the right to naturalize. That year, after living here for 47 years and raising 6 American-born children, she took her oath of citizenship. She was among thousands of elderly Issei who gathered in courthouses all over the country.
晩年の
Late in life,
アメリカ市民になれる我、
I thus attained American citizenship.
英語を学ぶと雨の夜も行く。
Going steadily to study English at night, even through the rain.
My children, remember, your parents struggled fiercely to build their life's work under the stigma of immigrant. Now, I am 70, arriving after many trials. I buried my wife in Japan, survived the war, all sad things lived through. My children, remember.
In 1980, Congress established the Commission on Relocation and Internment of Civilians. Hearings were held in major U.S. cities where 750 camp survivors testified about their experience, ending decades of silence.
My husband, 2 children, and I, along with my mother, her sister, and her family, were kept at Tamparan Racetrack early in 1942 and spent about 3 months there before we were sent by train to Topaz under armed escort. The assembly center was an open stable area, and we were given army cots to sleep on, made by the internees that were filled with straw. We lived in this temporary condition with little privacy or comfort. During the time at the assembly center, the question I wanted answered was, why was this happening to us when we were American citizens and had little to do with the war in Japan? Why? Why were we being treated this way? This question has been with me all these years and cannot be forgotten. Lily Sakai Sakino, August 1983, Ogden, Utah.
I left Camp Topaz in Utah at age 5, and my family went to Salt Lake City. On the outside, my generation suffered embarrassment at looking like the enemy. So we completely denied our ethnic background. I stopped speaking Japanese and wearing kimonos, and we never talked about camps. Later on, I learned that many internees were homeless after camp. I was told recently, and it's been confirmed by historians, that when all the gates of the 10 family camps were closed, that we were given only $25 and didn't know where to get our next meal from or where we would be sleeping that night. But I also learned that because of human nature, sometimes, during the worst of times, the best of times occurs. Many religious and social organizations found shelter for us until we found permanent living quarters. Quakers, WWCA, Buddhist temples, Christian churches, and compassionate friends and strangers. Alice Hidai, Nisei, Ogden, Utah.
After my dad died in 1976, my mom said, "Now that your father is gone, I'm going to unpack the suitcases I've kept all these years, ready for the next time. But next time, they're going to have to shoot me, because I won't go." Jeff and Tommy, Forensic Science, Salt Lake City, Utah.
Civilians reported that the camps were not justified by military necessity and were the result of race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership.
In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, and in 1990, President George H.W. Bush issued an official apology to the Japanese Americans.
Well, I received a letter on White House stationery signed by President George H.W. Bush. And enclosed was a check for $20,000. So I took that check and went to graduate school at the age of 64. You know, my mother and father did not live to see that day, and the apology would have meant so much to them. Nikki Nojima Louis, Nisei, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
75 years have passed since the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States declaration of World War II, and the forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast.
Most of the first generation Issei and many of the second generation Issei are gone.
The camps that held us captive in our own country have been reclaimed by the desert and swamplands on which they were built.
For a long time, we lived with Shigata Ganai. It can't be held. Now I say, what do you mean, it can't be held? We will have no more of this silence.
The unimaginable happened in 1942. Mass evacuation disguised as national security. We must safeguard our rights so that it never happens to another minority group.
This year is the 75th anniversary of the signing of the Executive Order 9066 and the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. We have commemorated this anniversary by taking our stories to the people of New Mexico.
And by remembering the greatest generation of Japanese Americans who have been our friends and neighbors. Medal of Honor recipient Hiroshi Hershey Miramura of Gallup, Mike Miyagishima and Dr. Roy Nakayama of Las Cruces, and in Albuquerque, Ruth Hashimoto, Kikukato, and my uncle, Dr. Sei Takuda.
Their families survived the hardships of a new land in a sometimes hostile environment, endured exclusion, racial discrimination, and lived through the Depression and World War II with gaman, grace and dignity.
They distinguished themselves as Americans and New Mexicans.
Many of us grew up with these families, the Acataguas, Saedas, Tamuras, Morimotos, Yonimotos, the Yoshimotos, Shabatas, Tagamis, Kobayashis, and Matsubaras.
We remember Mary Matsubara and her sister Evelyn Togami, two native-born daughters of Albuquerque, whose mother was a picture bride.
Yes, and our mom stood at the rail, looking down below at all those, with all the other picture brides.
And everyone was so worried about what kind of man they had married.
That Mary and Evelyn were lucky because their daddy was
Handsome.
And we remember Charlie Matsubara, whose father so loved the American flag.
Here they are together, the two sisters, Evelyn and Mary, and Charlie, who became Mary's husband.
And Evelyn married Art Tagami.
And she became Steve Togami's mom.
And Steve became president of our New Mexico JACL chapter.
They're members of the founding families of the New Mexico Japanese American Citizens League.
We close our program today with Charlie, who many of you knew. But did you know about his singing? Here he is in this interview with his wife and his sister-in-law. And he's talking about celery and vocalizing.
Sadly, Charlie and Evelyn passed shortly after we began this project, and as many of the founding families of New Mexico JACL.
And we dedicate this program to them.
No, I've always been happy regardless. So, the war was bad, but then you can't dwell on it.
The only thing about her, she lost her husband too early. I think he passed away. That's what I.
Well, no, it's just that if I hadn't lived this long, it wouldn't be that many.
She's fortunate enough. She knows how to stay happy, you know. Yes, right. You know, before I sing, I usually get a celery, and I chew on the celery food. It lines my vocal voice, and with that, my voice flows out freely and smoothly, and without any effort.
But try anyway, Charlie. We talk the celery.
Yeah, what's a good song? Oh, okay, I'll sing one. Short song.
Okay, sure, make it sure.
Dream when you're feeling blue. Dream, that's the thing to do. Just watch the smoke ring rise in the air. You'll find that your share of memory there. So dream when the day is through. Dream and they might come true. Things never are as bad as they seem. So dream, dream, dream.
Even without the celery.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Our American history. Thank you so much. And thanks to Eileen O'Connell and the library staff for bringing us back again. Before our cast introduces itself, please give a hand to a couple of guys who are always behind the scenes, but are always making our performances better. Mike Swick, who's the guy behind the video camera. He's the one who finds all of this music for us. And Davis Begay, honorary Consul General for Japan, when he's not running our slides. And you know, we've just recently received word from the Humanities Council that we have funding for our next project. And it will be on Japanese American soldiers, protesters, and prisoners of World War II. A little bit of what you've seen today. So now I would like to turn this over to the cast and let them introduce themselves to you, and then give you a chance to talk back to us.
Hi, my name is Paul Mayer, and I am half Japanese and half, I call it European mutt, but and so I'm Sansei, third generation. My whole Japanese side of my family were in the camps that you've just seen. My family was at Manzanar. They had been living in Southern California, went to Manzanar, and came back to California again after we got out of the camps. And I'm also a member of the JACL board here, and I'm sort of the resident movie otaku. And otaku is kind of a slang word in Japanese nowadays that means like geek or nerd. I'm quite enthusiastic about Japanese films, and sometimes we try to show some of them as, with our chapter meetings.
First of all, thank you for coming. Good afternoon. My name is Esther Churchwell, and I'm a Sansei, or third generation Okinawan from Hawaii. I've been with the New Mexico Japanese American Citizens League for the past 35 years, and I'm also on the board of directors. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for coming. My name is Joan Varney, and I am a Hapa Japanese American, which is a Hawaiian word for half. And my mother, Yoshiriki, was not interned because she was living in Denver, Colorado, so it was only the people on the West Coast. But I did have two aunts, Keiuriki and Lily Uriki, who were interned. And I've been with the JACL for the last 2 years. I came to a Day of Remembrance celebration here 2 years ago, and then joined, and it's just been, it's changed my life being able to do this living history and present it to audiences like you. Wonderful audience.
She was in our audience last year when we performed here, so you better watch it.
Hi, I'm Ikuko Begay, and I'm a first generation Issei. I was born and raised in Hiroshima, Japan. And I'm the only one who has a very, very strange accent. But through this reader theater, I learned so much about Japanese Americans. And Japanese Americans and Japanese are different animals.
Hi, my name is Rod Ventura. I am not Japanese descent.
Really?
I'm actually a Filipino-American descent. I just want to give a quick shout out to Rusty Chan, who's our other cast member who is also not of Japanese descent.
Hey, Rusty!
We've done a number of performances, and not all of us can make every performance. So Rusty has basically played every single role in this script. So we thank Rusty for that. And at first, I used to be pretty self-conscious about being a non-Japanese person playing in this performance. But when you hear it, you understand why they do it. There's a line that Calvin gets to say, which says something like, "We have to make sure this doesn't happen to any other minority." And there's a line that got taken out, which I'm heartbroken that it got taken out, which said, "This is not a Japanese story, this is an American story." And so just when you think that history can never happen again and it can't happen to you, it just might. So thank you, and remember what's going on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Calvin Kobayashi. I'm past president of New Mexico JCL. I was actually born in Colorado and moved to Albuquerque in second or third grade, and subsequently moved to Estancia, New Mexico, went into farming, and came back in. So here I am today. I got involved in JCL and becoming Japanese again, mainly out of guilt. For some reason, during my high school years, I spent a lot of time trying not to be Japanese and trying not to associate with that. And I felt very guilty about that because there's nothing that I'm more proud of right now is my Japanese heritage. And I'm spending all the rest of my life trying to make up for that by doing programs like this and being involved in New Mexico JCL. And that's my story. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it to tell our story and have you hear it and hopefully appreciate the history that's going on behind it. Makes me feel very good. Thank you.
I want to introduce to you Nikki Nojima Louis, who has written, directed, produced these plays. She's been quite a few places doing these plays for us. And she's a New Mexican, transplanted New Mexican. She lives part of the time in her hometown of Seattle, Washington, and spends quite a bit of time here in New Mexico too. We would like to thank her for dividing up her time and helping us, for writing all these grants and for getting approval of numerous grants. Have you seen our next grant that's coming up? And she read a lot of the things from her own history when she was 4 years old on the bombing of Pearl Harbor, by which she just celebrated her birthday several days ago on December 7th. So we wanted to honor her here today with some of the gifts that we have.
Okay. So this is for you. Nikki has been a tireless, totally dedicated, patient director. Okay, she's lost her temper a few times, but you know, we're amateurs, we're not professional actors. And, you know, she celebrated her birthday working into the night on our technical problems. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Well, thank you, and
In addition to that, you know, luckily Nikki is actually going to be leaving in a few days, go back up to Seattle, but she's coming back, and we're going to put on this new production, and the cast is very excited about it, and hopefully you'll tell your friends about this. We feel like it is a really powerful media to get a message across, and we thank Nikki for bringing this medium to our midst here. All right.
series, this speaker series is so popular that it's all filled up for next year. You know, for the monthly series on the, I think it's the first Saturday of every month. But she's made a special space for us on February 17th. So we will bring you our yet unwritten play, Soldiers, Protesters, and Prisoners, in whom Rusty will also have a part. And we hope to see you next February 17th.